Hello. Thanks to everyone for coming tonight. Oh, hey, what's up? It's been a while. Yeah, excited to see everyone here for this talk. Welcome to the Austin Mobile and Indie Game Dev Meetup. So just a quick note about the name of the group. You know, we've actually kind of been tweaking the name a bit. Originally when we started, we were the Mobile and Web Game Dev Meetup, and then I tacked on Indie in there because I felt like we were having a lot of people talk about stuff that wasn't necessarily for mobile or web, but maybe Steam or like PC stuff. So it made sense to add that in there to the name. And then I realized that was kind of like too long of a name to have mobile, indie, and web. It was kind of like hard to get it all out. So I kind of shortened it to mobile and indie. And also the other reason I did that is because we just started a Twitter account. So if you want to go follow that, it's ATX_MIGD_meetup. So that's like mobile indie game dev meetup. And so yeah, basically we're still going to be covering all the same stuff. We'll still definitely have people talk about HTML5 game development, and if somebody talks about VR stuff or wearable game dev or whatever, all of that still falls under the umbrella of what we're going to cover. But we just thought it would make sense to kind of shorten the name to make it a little bit less unwieldy. So that's just a quick announcement about that. So these meetups are held on the fourth Tuesday of every month here at Capital Factory. If you're not already on the Meetup group on meetup.com, go ahead and join it so that we'll get announcements about future events. We always announce it about a couple weeks ahead of time, so keep an eye out for that in future months. Also, I mentioned this over the group announcement email list, but if anybody wants to have convenient parking, you're welcome to park in the garage underneath the Omni Hotel for a discounted rate of $5 for the night. You just have to arrive after 6 p.m. and you have to request a validation ticket from the Capital Factory staff person. You can just find someone at the front desk up there and they'll give you that ticket. You can get out for pretty cheap. If you forget the ticket, then it can be like super expensive, like $20 or so for the night. So you definitely don't want to do that. But yeah, it's convenient in case the weather is bad or something like that. Also, I would like to thank our sponsors for this event. One of them is Capital Factory itself, which has been nice enough to let us use this space. It's a great venue, great facility, great screens and seating and all that stuff. So definitely tell them thanks if you see one of their staff members or whatever. The other sponsor I wanted to thank, and who has helped us get the food and refreshments, is Pearson. And actually we have someone here from Pearson who drove all the way from San Antonio to say a few words about Pearson. Not going to be a long sales pitchy kind of thing, but she just wanted to kind of talk to you for a couple minutes about what they have going on. So yeah, this is Annalisa.
Hi, thanks for having me. So Pearson, for those of you who may not be very familiar with the company, is involved in a lot of different things. Most people think of Pearson in terms of your K through 12 standardized testing that our kids take in school. But I represent our clinical assessment division. So that is the group that makes psychological testing. So intelligence testing, speech and language disorder testing, learning disabilities. Basically, if you were to take your child to a psychologist or use your software to go to a psychologist, you would more than likely be given some sort of Pearson assessment. And so from a technology perspective, what we're doing is we're migrating from your traditional paper and pencil testing to online and interactive tablet-based testing. So now in the world we live in today, the psychologist would have a tablet, the patient would have a tablet, and there would be questions being administered real time based on their responses. And then the data is combined, and the psychologist gets the results and then recommendations on possible courses of treatment and action. So we are right now looking for software engineers. We need folks who have experience hand coding JavaScript. There's a little bit of Objective-C, HTML5, CSS3, but definitely the heavy JavaScript is what we're needing. I will leave some business cards in the back if you're interested in learning more or know someone who might be. I'd love to talk to them.
And the position is in Austin, just to...
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. We have an office on Howard Lane in Austin, and we've got 2 roles. We've got a staff and a senior level role. So let's talk to you if you're interested. Thanks.
Yeah. And grab her afterwards if you want to ask her more questions or kind of chat more about what they have going on over there. It sounds really cool. So yeah, and definitely, I just want to reiterate that without sponsors like Pearson and Capital Factory, we wouldn't be able to do these events. So we're very gracious for their help and their support, and it's good to have people like that, supporting these community kinds of meetings and efforts to help build a community of developers and indie game stuff here in Austin. So thanks again. Let's see, so moving on, just want to throw it out there that we're always looking for future events, we're always looking for people who are interested in speaking, presenting, or sponsoring us, or even volunteering to help out with setup or lining up speakers or whatever. So if you may be interested in doing any of those things, definitely get in touch with me. You can reach me on the Meetup group on the page, just on the left-hand side. I think there's a button that says contact the organizer, and I'll get an email and I'll respond to you. As far as speaking about games and what you've been working on, even if you haven't necessarily released a game or have it completely polished and finished, you just have a project that you're kind of riffing on, and you learned some interesting lesson from it that you thought might be interesting to share with the group, other people could learn useful lessons from, then definitely get in touch. We're always interested in, presenting stuff that would help the community. So love to hear from you. And I guess at this point, I would just like to open up the floor for announcements from anybody who may be looking for someone to hire for a particular position for maybe the company that they run or that they're working at, or if they're looking for someone to collaborate with on a particular game dev related project, or if you have any announcements related to other game dev events here in town, then now would be a great time to speak up. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi everybody, my name is Brian. I'm a co-founder at a company that just launched here, or just was founded about 7 months ago. We just launched on Kickstarter last Tuesday, called Pop-Up Play. And what we do is we're helping kids to imagine, create, and play in a playscape of their own design, or playhouse of their own design. So if you're at the Maker Fair last weekend, you might have seen us there with the castle we had set up. But we're building an app that's kind of like Google SketchUp for 5-year-olds, and we're building it in Unity. I am not the technical guy, but I am. Our technical guy is in Orlando, so I'm here trying to fake this. But we're looking for Unity developers who are interested in, working with kids' apps and doing something really badass. So, what she said, come see me if you're interested.
Thanks. Anyone else? Gordon? No positions?
Just art.
Oh, well, yeah, speak
okay.
up.
Gordon Walton, looking for both a UI artist and a special effects artist.
Cool.
To work in Unity.
Cool. Great. Anyone else? Any announcements, community events, game dev related things? All right. Well, thanks so much, guys. And so I guess now I'm going to go ahead and move on to our speaker for tonight. I guess it will be Adam Gabbert. He's going to be speaking for maybe roughly an hour, and his talk will kind of integrate kind of Q&A, free-form discussion with more of a structured slide kind of thing. He'll go into more detail about that when he starts. But so yeah, feel free when he's talking to go ahead and ask questions at any point, I guess, to make it more of an interactive experience. That will last maybe about an hour, and then we'll wrap up, and you guys are welcome to hang out more, have more beer, eat more food if there's any left. And the only stipulation is we need to be out of the space by 9 p.m. because the Capital Factory staff people want to go home for the night, so we just need to go ahead and wrap it up by that point. But that should give us plenty of time to hang out after he talks. So, yeah, I guess without further ado, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Adam Gabbert. He's got some awesome info and wisdom to share with us about the studio's game, Tourtellotte, and he's got a great history working at different game companies, Pixar and whatnot. So take it away.
So how's it going, everyone? Thanks, Todd, for talking to Matt and getting us to present, and thanks for everyone who's sponsoring the event. So as far as the structure of this talk, I don't really know what I haven't been to one of these meetups before, so I don't know how many people are devs and how many people are artists and what people's interest is. So I kind of cover the smorgasbord of topics in here, and we can dwell on things that people are more interested in and kind of gloss over things that people are less interested in. So because of that, that's why I think we should kind of integrate the questions, because if people aren't asking anything, I'll assume that it's because they're not that interested. As far as the game, has anyone played Tourtellotte? It's totally fine that you haven't. So I'll give you an intro to the game then, so you'll know more about it. All right, so Manitou Games, we founded it in 2011. It's me and Matt Baer. I'm Adam Gabbert. I already know that. So Matt's been in the game industry for a long time, over 20 years. He started at Looking Glass Studios as a developer. He worked at Ion Storm. And then he started working at Junction Point Studios as like a founding member. I worked at Pixar. Before that, I worked like at National Insurance, which is actually where I work now. But then I switched to film for a while and worked at Pixar, and then I switched to games, worked at Junction Point Studios on Disney Epic Mickey with Matt. And that's where we met, and we kind of just found out that we just share a lot of similar opinions about games and game development, and we're really excited about maybe taking things into our own hands and starting our own studio. So we decided after we shipped Disney Epic Mickey to do that. So that happened in 2011, where we switched to basically working outside of the game industry at National Instruments so we could moonlight on Tourtellotte, which we released in early this year, February. As far as Tourtellotte, it's a game exclusively for iOS. It's based on fluid simulation. It was actually featured in the App Store in 14 different countries, the biggest of which is China, which is probably why no one here has ever seen it, because it's not featured in the US. So we got about 250,000 downloads, and I don't know, a few hundred in the US. So it would be amazing if you guys had actually played it, unless you just followed the link and downloaded it when we sent out the topic. It was developed exclusively by Matt and myself. I had a friend, Aaron Black, who did all the audio support, and we got an artist from online to help us do the art. So I was going to go ahead and play our intro video and talk a little bit about what the gameplay is, and then we can kind of get into more details. Does this have sound? Oh, it's not through the speakers.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. It's not your fault. Let me see if I can
Just crank it up.
start this and crank it up. All right, so anyway. Yeah, so basically it's a complete fluid mechanic-based game. So the main character here, the turtle, is Luna. So the main character is Luna. It's your avatar. You're basically exploring this world where you're in the fluid and collecting coins and stars. The story kind of reveals itself as you go through. And essentially, it's a heavily touch-based game, so you touch the screen and that affects the current, and that is how you essentially both guide the avatar and affect the environment around you. And we kind of like layer in mechanics as the game progresses and you learn it. So that is that. Oops, escape was not the right button to press, sorry.
For what age group? Little kids playing?
Yeah, so it was designed to be for all ages. We do have mines and they explode, and because of that we had to say it was age, I think, 7 and up. But there's no blood or anything. Originally it was supposed to be infinite lives. I'll talk about it a little bit, is that since we're working as a moonlighting project, it took a while to develop. I think that was one of the topics I was kind of focused on, because it seemed like there was a lot of interest in actually releasing a game as a side project, and the timeline makes it so actually the kind of the environment and market shifts out from under you. So because of that, we actually switched to the freemium model very late in the development process, and we introduced the concept of lives as a way to actually have an in-app purchase. But yeah, it's really supposed to be really exploratory, and kids could discover it and play it over time. And a lot of our testing is on kids. So there are some issues where I think it's probably too difficult for a lot of kids the way it is right now, which I'll get to too in the lessons learned. So I was going to start talking about the moonlighting aspect because in addition to, I didn't necessarily have a lot of slides here, but I think Todd thought that's where a lot of the interest would be. So you guys can definitely ask questions about it. Also, I think these few slides kind of reflect a lot of my comments and opinions and lessons learned about the development process. So it's a good place to start. One thing I'd mention is that what took us the longest time to get started up is to figure out how to actually do this without essentially either bankrupting ourselves or getting in a lot of legal trouble. So we worked at Junction Point Studios, and did you guys ever play the game Jelly Car? Or like this car that could roll over the environment. Yeah, so that was actually developed by someone who worked for Disney as a side project, and they just tried to do it on the sly. And I believe Disney actually, once they made $1 million, sued them. And I actually know a lot of, in almost every place in the game industry we talked to, they wouldn't actually let us sign anything that said we would own these topics and we could work on the side. They just said, oh, don't worry, we won't tell our bosses. It's totally fine if you work on it. And generally, I think they're just gambling that it won't matter because 99% of games are never successful. But you really don't want to basically put all the monumental effort into developing a game on the side just to when you finally win the lottery and actually make money, just get sued by your employer. So I wouldn't work on the sly. You should definitely focus on getting explicit ownership rights. Part of the reason we went to National Instruments is because we couldn't find a game company that seemed to actually be okay with giving us the right to develop on the side. They considered it, I guess, conflict of interest. So anything we came up with, they would own. So we decided to leave the industry, go to National Instruments. We got in our contracts, basically, it stated that not only did we own anything we had thought of, a lot of companies will give you the right to any IP you already declare up front, but what it's really hard to do is get the right to develop new IP without having it bound in any particular way. So we not only got the right to write games for iOS or the web, or PC. We got the right to write tools to make those games, even if those tools, as long as we didn't sell those tools, it was okay if those tools, I work on a programming language called WebView, and we actually got the right to write essentially a tool that allowed us to script code for the environment if we wanted to, even though that is direct competition because we wouldn't sell that tool, we would only use it to write a program. So that's really nice. And I've also, when I've talked to other companies, I know a lot of the time, you'll hear some companies, they'll say, oh, well, you can work on the side, I guess, but we're really worried about it possibly distracting you from the day job. That's, I think, another red flag from a lot of employers because generally speaking, if they're concerned about that, it one means they probably think your extra hours are their hours. And that means it's really going to be really hard to moonlight on the side because it does take up a lot of time. And in addition to that, it just means they're probably going to start looking for escape clauses if it turns out you're actually becoming successful. So something to worry about. And another way just to CYA is basically, if you get everyone to agree to everything, don't jeopardize anything by abusing company resources. Don't do too much work on your game project at the company. Don't use their resources or their computers or anything like that. So generally speaking, it seems like this would be kind of obvious, except I don't know, 20 other people who are working on the side, and basically all of them are just doing the on-the-sly thing. Some people are working on 20 hours a week on a game, and they're not even in the credits as their way of protecting themselves. And it just seems a little fishy. So.
And most of those people are at game companies?
Yeah, most of them are game companies. When we're talking about leaving JPS, our inspector was like, oh, just stay here, it's okay, we won't tell the bosses. And it just didn't seem like a very great pitch. So.
You mentioned projects that you might declare before coming on board with a given game studio. That's normally part of the contract, like in Exhibit A, right? You just stop. If you put something on one of those lists, would it be okay then to continue working on it as part of the company?
That depends.
Or does it just say?
Generally, it protects it a little bit, but it's really murky whether it actually gives you the right to keep on working on things like sequels and stuff like that. But it definitely kind of pigeonholes you a little bit. It might not allow you to use the engine to write a game that's unrelated that uses the same tech or just work on something else. You definitely can't say, a lot of the time you can't really say, I have this other business and that business wants to keep making new material.
Right.
And generally speaking, that's kind of where you want to be in. I think that's harder. But at the end, even when you get these things, it's somewhat peace of mind. I'm not sure if it actually went to court, how all this would play out.
Okay.
So,
cool. Thank you.
But I know there's some places like Google, for example, is an interesting place to work that's on the game industry. And when you talk to a Google recruiter, if you say, oh yeah, this company I co-founded, we're working on iPhone games, they're excited. They love it when people work on other things outside because they just want really excited, bright people. So I think generally the best companies should want people who have so much passion about their job that it's not enough of them for just to clock in.
Right.
And they want to work on other things. So also when you're working on the side, by the way, so all these images are like different assets from the game that I just dropped in because they were like vaguely tangentially related. This is Gearhead. He's the bad guy in our game. And I guess he represents the man for the eagle shoes. Anyway, this is our zombie turtle. It gives you unlimited lives. So this is kind of what we felt like sometimes trying to do this moonlighting gig. So as far as balance, basically, it's really awesome if you can do something different for the day job. I think the hardest thing is working on the side is you work a full day and then you go home and all of a sudden you basically do dinner or something like that and then you need to work more. It's really hard if you have a significant other, spouse, whatever. When we worked at the game industry, there were times where we were doing like 7-day weeks, kind of 13 hours a day for like months on end. It was like really brutal. JPS kind of became a sweatshop at some point. And part of the reason we left beyond introducing exploring these things is my wife was like, I'll divorce you if you basically don't stop. But the thing is when I left and I was like, oh, now I'm doing my own thing. And for me, it was like, oh, this is a hobby now. But I actually got to the point where I was like, I would start skipping social obligations and say, oh, you go hang out. She'd go, oh, we have plans with friends. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. You do that and I'll keep working on the game. So at some point, I kind of turned my side project into another death march. So that's something really bad. So the times when it was best, by the way, when I was doing that extra work is if I got to the point where something that would normally, I would think historically maybe have been bad, if my day job turned into something where I was going to meetings all the time and spending less time actually coding, that was actually kind of really nice because then all of a sudden when I came home and had to code, it was like a mental break as opposed to switching from coding one project to another project and doing that nightly context switch. So that was really nice. So it's really cool if you can find some kind of balance so it's not more of the same when you're doing the transition between the day job and the night job. Burnout risk, there's a lot of things for that. One is you're working really hard. Two, the fact that you're working on this personal project, you don't have a salary for it. You know that you're basically fighting the odds because small games basically hardly ever succeed. It's like the 1 in 100 actually, even I think break even or something like that. So it's really easy to burn out and decide it's not worth it. You don't have, especially if you're a small team, then you don't have a lot of people at any given time basically encouraging the other members. So that's really rough. And in addition to that, you don't have like that pressure, like I'm going to starve. You're actually, well, actually I have a paycheck already. So so that's pretty rough. And so you got to kind of balance all those things so you can keep it going. And just remember that like game development should be fun. That's part of the reason we wanted to start our own thing. And part of that is like trying to balance things and not go too crazy with it. But trying to achieve that balance and not burn out also causes something. And this is, I think, one of the things that's the biggest difference between working on it as a side project and normal game development is the time scales are crazy. So you have a really small team, you're working part-time, it's stop and go. Like I said, sometimes you get burnout, sometimes life comes up, sometimes you actually have to just work overtime on the day job. So you have spans where you don't do anything. So it took us 4 years to write this. I'd say if we were working full-time on it, we probably would have gotten it done in a year. And because of that, there's a lot of things that just like, is kind of brutal, like the tech changes. So when we started, we were working on, the 3GS was the most popular phone by far. The 4 had just come out. We're looking at if we wanted any international sales, we definitely had to support the 3GS, and the 3GS didn't support like pixel shaders, which clearly if you're doing a fluid sim-based game, it seems like a no-brainer to use pixel shaders, but we didn't want to cut ourselves out of 80% of the market. So we're like, okay, we're gonna somehow to do this in OpenGL 1.1 and write all these really like old school shader techniques that were really hard to write. And then basically what happened is by the time we actually released the game, no one used the 3GS anymore. And we were basically killing ourselves trying to support a tech pipeline that was essentially antiquated. So realize that if you can't really just be committed to getting it done in a short period of time, and you are going to basically working over a longer period of time, that you shouldn't make too many decisions based on short-term tech environments because it'll change a lot. In addition to that, the environment changes in terms of like what's popular at Apple, what's popular in the community. When we started, we were just like, we're just gonna release a 99-cent game and we'll be like Angry Birds or Spider or I think Tiny Wings had just come out, and we're like, oh God, Tiny Wings is so inspiring. We're gonna be that guy. So that's what we're planning on, and we basically developed the game that way. And then all of a sudden it was like, it turned out that except for those three, basically you couldn't make money off a 99-cent game anymore. And freemium came in, and basically people were like, why would I pay money for 99 cents per game when I could get one for free? So you pretty much had to go free, and Candy Crush was making all this money. And then we just kind of basically got completely disheartened because we didn't really want to make that type of game, and we just thought we were basically screwed. And then we took like a year off. We have like, when I was looking at the code when we got back into the last push to finish the project, there were files that I hadn't touched in a year, which was kind of crazy, especially because it's really hard after a year taking time off to remember how your fluid sim works. And then it was crazy again, because then when it was actually time to release our game, Apple all of a sudden freaked out and decided that they wanted to push premium again, and pretend freemium was horrible. So we would have been better off if we never switched in the first place. So anyway, so that's kind of like that time scale thing. I think it takes a long time because like you're worried about burnout and balancing everything. And essentially that time scale made things shift a lot from under us. And a lot of our lessons learned as we're developing, it'll kind of come up there. And any questions about that? It was really only like 3 slides, and it seemed like what thought most people would be interested in.
Yeah, somewhat related to what you were just saying. Was this your first iOS title, or did you do that in kind of your day job at the studio?
No, before that I had done Wii, and before that I worked on Linux making animation and lighting software for film. So we basically decided, we learned Objective-C from scratch for this. And not only that, we didn't use any middleware, which I'll get into why not in a little bit, but during the development slides. But yeah, this was basically first dipping our toes into iOS. And that was the point where it was just like, when we first started this, iOS was new, and it was like, wow, just some guy you've never heard of can become a millionaire and make a game that changes the world. We're like, we want to be that guy. Unfortunately, I think we had to start 4 years earlier to be that guy. But or do the thing where we quit our jobs and ate ramen. But he had 2 kids, we both had mortgages, so it seemed a little foolhardy to basically quit our jobs and live off savings and put our wives on the street. So
what's the plan? What are you going to do next?
It's a good question. I kind of get to that a little bit at the end, if it makes a little more sense to save it for there. But yeah, we're kind of regrouping now. My wife's 9 months pregnant, so I'm going to kind of ride that out before I jump into another project. But yeah, we're trying to decide. I think we're going to do a couple of experiments with our current release. I'll talk a little bit about in the lessons learned about what we figured out. It's kind of unfortunate because we've learned a lot of stuff and it seems like it's invaluable. And I'm afraid, based on these timeline things, if we could act on it right now, it'd be amazing. I have a feeling that it'll all be invalid data by the time we actually get another title out, which is unfortunate. But we'll see. Maybe we can do things faster and smarter the next time.
I guess that kind of raises the question of like, it seems like there's this golden period when a new platform first appears on the scene that people can play games on, where it's like, it's pretty much open territory, and you can get pretty good notoriety from releasing something that's high quality for it, and then very quickly it becomes saturated. So, do you think that means just by definition? But then at the same time, you're saying that like if you're doing something as a side project, it's necessarily going to take a longer time. So do you think that by definition, it's kind of impossible for someone doing a game as a side project to capitalize on that early golden period of opportunity on a new platform? Like, for example, if you guys decided like, oh, VR is the hot thing right now, so let's do something for Oculus Rift. It's like, if you took 4 years to make it, then by the time it comes out, it might no longer be such a hot opportunity. So
yeah, it's definitely a good question. It is really hard to take advantage of it. Most of the people I know who managed to essentially did it full time as opposed to a moonlighting game. I know that's what Tiger Style did for Spider. I have a friend who was in I before I left for Pixar. He left and did Mob Wars and is now an executive at Zika and like an angel builder. And he was a guy who's just a junior engineer who said, I'm going to go make a Facebook game. So, but when he did it, he quit, moved to the Bay Area, and ate ramen for a year and had like 2 bad releases before it like Mob Wars got on, and he got like 4 million users. So it's like, I don't know, there's definitely something about being able to strike while the iron's hot. We were kind of hoping that quality would matter, and since it did, we actually did get featured and we got a lot of users. So we actually managed to get noticed enough to get into the limelight for a little bit. And then some of our lessons learned was we didn't really prep enough for it, so we kind of missed the opportunity. So that's one of the things is like getting featured kind of seems like winning the lottery because you get all this exposure for free, but actually it doesn't guarantee you really much of anything. It's really easy to get featured and then have a bunch of users basically glance at it and then quickly move on, because a lot of people just look at it because it's featured. They look at every app that gets featured and they basically, maybe pick their favorite one and walk away from it. So,
what would you have done with the preparation for being the featured app?
I'll get to that in lessons learned about testing. So that was our main thing, is we found out way more information from our initial users than we did from our testers. And if we had actually done things better and found that information out from our testers, we would have avoided a lot of our pitfalls. So we'll jump into that when I get there. By the way, definitely keep on asking questions, even though half the time it seems like I'm saying, oh, wait, it's in my presentation. So sorry about that. What's up?
You had mentioned that you started off with the idea of charging 99 cents for your app, but then you went to free, but then by the time you released, you wish you'd changed that? Is that right? Or
so we went to free literally in December, and we released in February. We essentially just did that whole flip right then and kind of gutted the whole game to do that. And then I swear 2 weeks, and at the time we were having all this kind of existential crisis, is I feel dirty for doing this somehow. I tested with a kid who was playing the version where I give it to him and he just plays, and if he dies 100 times, that's okay. And he was loving it. And then I saw him again and I gave him the passcodes so we could download the one that we checked in for test flight. And it had the live thing. I didn't give him the passwords yet, and he was just oh, crying because he lost all his lives. And I was like, oh God, I feel like a horrible person. And then we're having this existential crisis, but it's well, if we don't do that, we won't make any money. And it's well, we actually kind of wanted to be able to potentially, make enough money that we could go full time and not keep on working on it essentially as a permanent hobby. So we decided to let that one out. And we also convinced ourselves we could tweak everything, and if we had it just right, it was basically there are ways around it. So you could make bigger in-app purchases. You can buy the zombie turtle and never worry about lives again. And that trying to figure out the right way to price things, and it's worked these relative economies where it's so the kid who's testing it, his dad is actually a musician. And I said, well, why don't you just buy your kid the 1999 turtle that has infinite lives? And he's like, that's crazy, I'm not spending that much on your game. But he just asked me to buy 3 of his CDs for $25 each. I was like, that's crazy, you spent a year making that CD and I spent 4 years making this game. And you won't pay less money just to let your kid play for free. So it seemed kind of crazy to me. But there's that weird thing where people view everything relatively. So the fact that free games exist means people don't want to pay anything for it. And it's kind of rough. And we also felt really bad about the number of ads, but it was well, for $2, you can turn off all the ads. But still, we had all these horrible reviews that was you guys are horrible, I can't believe you put ads in the game. And it's which was fun too, because those were all reviews in Chinese. So they'd say, ooh, a review in Chinese, let's see what they don't like about it. It'd just be I guess the Chinese equivalent of saying news about ads, which is fun. It's kind of rough. So I can't even remember what the original question was. Oh yeah, except then the craziest thing is, so we did all that source searching, we're it's just well, maybe it's okay. And then a week before we went out, Apple did this whole thing where it's their website is premium zone, and they were responding to negative feedback about framing maps, and they were pushing and featuring all these 99 cent and $4.99 and $3.99 apps. They made this whole big deal about people really don't want to see ads. And it's after basically all of Apple's published metrics and articles essentially convinced us that we had to do that or we'd suffer. So that was pretty rough. Anything else before I jump into this? So by the way, what percentage of people are here are devs versus artists? The hands being devs? Okay, cool. Some of the the game engine stuff, we wrote a game engine from scratch. I could get pretty technical, or I could just gloss over it. So I'll let you guys, I'll just kind of give you what's in the slides, and you guys ask questions if you're interested in the technical side of things, or if you want to stick mainly to like the lessons learned on the business side of things, that's totally cool too. But so when we started working on this game, we had taken the new job, because we actually explicitly forbid ourselves from talking about the game at all while we were at JPS, because we just didn't want anything to come back and haunt us. We didn't want any files that were timestamped. If we ever got like subpoenaed by Disney, I don't know, somehow we were convinced Disney was horrible. Like, see, you have a Disney shirt on, so sorry if you love them, but I still have a lot of Disney stock, so I don't think them too bad. But whatever the case is, we were worried about it, so we started a new job and we're like, we're gonna figure out how we want to do this. So we figured out a couple things. Is we wanted to make a game that really took advantage of the platform. We felt like there were all these games where basically the entire screen was just a button, or even worse yet, like a joystick that it was really hard to keep your fingers on the control. And we wanted to make a game that was like completely about touch, and you couldn't port it to any environment other than a touchscreen. And while we're talking about that, we got really excited about the idea of like using a fluid simulation somehow, but not just doing a fluid simulation where it's like, where's my water or something, where you push a button but then just see water like going down tunnels or something like that, but where you actually manipulated the water directly, and as you touch the screen, it would create currents and it would feel incredibly immersive. So that was something we really cared about. We got really excited about fluid simulation, although we weren't sure yet whether it'd be water or air or something like that. We also got really jazzed about using an indirect control mechanism, where it was, you weren't just steering an avatar through a dynamic environment, but you were controlling the environment itself. I think part of the reason is that we're trying to play to our strengths, is we're two developers. If we used Unity when we're developers, it's like, well, we take the game engine, and then basically whatever we made, probably a couple of people could just hire better artists and copy your game and do way better. Kind of like the way I think Fruit Ninja was like really successful, and it was a copy of some other game, and they just put better art on it. I think Angry Birds, technically there were like 8 games that were pretty much the exact same mechanic, and they kind of came out with the cutest art. We're like, we're never going to win on just having the cutest art, so we have to do something that essentially artists can't copy. And part of that was basically figuring out a mechanic where it wasn't simple. So we figured this way is if someone even wanted to copy us, maybe we're worrying too much, because this is probably one of the lessons learned, is we worried probably too much about people copying us if we're successful, and we should worry more about being successful. But whatever the case is, we figured this gave us like a year padding behind some badass devs if they even wanted to copy us. We also figured it was really unique. We couldn't find any games that were this type of fluid sim. There were maybe a couple of like little tech demos that were just basically some particles moving around on the screen, but it seemed like pretty unique. It also seemed, so that was exciting. So if people actually liked the game, we'd stand out, and we would have just become like one of many similar games. So we started prototyping a bunch of stuff and tried different strategies, and we ended up going with essentially Navier-Stokes grid-based simulation. So yeah, the Navier-Stokes equations are basically these differential equations that govern like essentially the dynamics of fluid. And this is a grid-based simulation where you essentially set up a bunch of cells, they have a bunch of pressure values and velocity values in them, and you just iterate with each frame. So basically you add pressure into the system, and then it resolves itself and settles down, and that's a stage of the simulation. So we did that, and it's interesting because it's used in film some. It's not really used in games very much, because it's really hard to make work real time, especially on a mobile device, and we're trying to get this to work on the 3GS originally. So we ended up writing our engine completely from scratch, not only because we weren't sure if we could even integrate a fluid simulation into something like Unity, because it seemed like a lot of things like Unity, it's like, especially at the time, I think they're more open now, although I think you have to pay more money if you want to actually really modify the source, but I'm not super familiar with Unity. But there were 2 issues. One is like, could we integrate it? And then the second issue was it used so many resources that we needed to essentially write the entire engine such that all the resources were dedicated to the simulation. So not only was the simulation like heavily customized, in fact, I wrote the whole thing in like handwritten Neon assembly because it was because I wanted to take care of like the SIMD instruction set. And initially it was just too slow when it was loops. I tried using the Blast math library, and that was too slow. I tried using the options for doing vectorization in the compiler, and that was too slow. So I ended up writing a lot of assembly by hand as far as making it so we have a game that's expansive, you can like scroll. The worlds are actually pretty big. We wanted it to focus on exploration, but obviously simulating the whole world is imperative. So we did a lot of research into things like either progressive refinement, where we'd have low-res simulation going off screen and high-res on screen in a moving window, or just have like this window that moves in so it's still everywhere else. So we did a bunch of stuff like that, and we wanted the fluids to affect everything. So that's part of the reason we wrote from hand. And then the other reason is basically every other system had to be stripped down to the bare minimum, because if you just get like Unity or something, they give you a powerful general physics engine, because it lets people want to write different types of games, and that's going to use up more cycles than you normally have. So we needed to streamline all that so we could dedicate as much as possible to the game. So
I guess I just had a quick question on the fluid stuff. I mean, have you guys considered selling that tech or licensing out that? I know you said something about the legal aspects of that maybe being a little dicey.
Well, no, so we could sell that. I don't know that we could sell it to enough where it wouldn't be like an emotional defeat. Like, right, if we sold it, I mean, I guess there's making a toolkit that we could also use. So one thing is just selling the game engine, so someone could then basically try to make like a game engine based on our tech after they have all the rights to it in the source code. And if they made $1 million and like I sold it for like 10,000, I'd be really depressed, because that still would work out to like less than minimum wage by a long shot. So I wasn't necessarily really excited about that. I'm not sure. When we get into the designing a game for Fluid Sim, it's actually really hard to design a game around Fluid Sim. I think we did a really good job, but it's not one of those things where you can just give it to a lot of people and they could actually probably make great games. It's a pretty steep learning process just to figure out how to do it. Yeah, I don't know. So we were definitely tech guys who wanted to get more into making games and didn't want to turn it back into just like selling tech, because kind of that, once again, that's what we do during the day job. So we really like the creative aspect of it and using our tech expertise to support that, as opposed to do whatever. Although maybe someday, if we're really successful and people like it, I could see doing that eventually. But yeah, it didn't seem too plausible. But we didn't research it too heavily. Makes sense. Yeah, so graphics-wise, we stuck to 2D mainly because we didn't have an artist on our team, and trying to get 3D assets done like by someone who wasn't part of our team probably would have been a nightmare. And also, we probably would have been like 2.5D or something like that, because actually having any kind of 3D animation system probably would have used up way too much resources. So it was, like I already told you, we use 1.1, so no pixel shaders or anything. Everything in the engine's optimized for like lots of floating objects, because having water but then just having like one thing floating in it would be really boring. So we just wanted like everything to feel alive. So we have like coins exploding everywhere. Like if you break open the chest, a bunch of coins pop out. Every time you touch the water, there's all these like stars that go from your fingertips. So it's like feels kind of magical. We have all these ribbons in the water so you can see currents. So pretty much from the graphics side, almost all the resources are dedicated to rendering the water. We have caustics, we have like hundreds of ribbons, all these like, we call them motes, but all these like stars floating around in the water and just all these objects. So that took a long time to get the water right. It's actually really hard. If you add too much sheen, it looks like it's saran wrap or plastic. If you add too little, it looks like it's Play-Doh. It took forever to actually get so it actually looked like water, and you could tell what it was doing. It was really easy to make something that looked like water that you couldn't see what was going on, or you could make it so you could see what was going on, but it just didn't feel like water. So that took a long time. Let's see, physics-wise, we have our own physics engine. It's a lightweight, rigid body system that's like really optimized, so it doesn't have any excess in it. In addition to that, unlike Havoc or something like that, our collision response is really tuned for fluids. We didn't want to, when we collide with the rigid body, we didn't want to bounce off of it or stop. It had to feel fluid, so things have to slide off of each other and everything like that. So, so that was part of it, is giving that like really kind of fluid response, like two objects drifting through current bump as opposed to running into stationary objects. In addition to that, there's a lot of stuff for forward advection. Advection is a term used in fluid sim a lot. It's the process that makes things move with the current. So we have a lot of like really optimized code for making it so you have hundreds of objects and you have to update their position based on like grids in a cell. So part of the problem is like you just have essentially squares like this big, but you want to look like the current is really fine and detailed. So there's a lot of interpolation involved. That was fun to figure out. On the other hand, because we actually decided to write it from scratch, that meant we had to do a lot of like really annoying stuff that we wouldn't have done if we'd actually used like Unity or something. So we had to write our animation system, which is kind of like low-tech, like turtle animation, and we had to write that even instead of using like something that would have been like more sophisticated that we got out of the thing. Because we wrote it by hand, we didn't really have an animation editor, so it was like tweaking values in like Objective-C file to adjust animations. It was pretty brutal. We had to write our own sound system. We had to do all our own shop stuff in UI. We had to write our editor and all the serializations for our save levels. We essentially had to write all the HUD stuff. We had to do menu work. Essentially pretty much every aspect of the game engine we had to write from scratch because we decided to ignore pre-existing technologies, which was pretty rough. So this is our world turtle. So symbolizing we had to write the whole world or whatever. And this is the one that if you purchase, it means like you get all the turtle powers active simultaneously as opposed to having to choose. This is kind of our whale thing. We heard a lot about there being whales who would just like hemorrhage money into your game. So the worst thing you could do is like have some kind of weird cap that prevented those whales from basically supporting you. I'm not actually sure the whales exist. We found like, we did maybe have like 10 users who seemed to buy everything, but it didn't really add up. Maybe we should have made something that cost like $5,000 or something.
It's probably because you didn't optimize your game to be like some super addictive like gambling thing.
Yeah, no, that is true. We should have probably had Turtle just pulling a slot machine or something like that. What's up?
Did you have the turtle design in mind from the start, or did that come about from the limitation that you discovered, basically maybe writing an animation system that it was going to be easy to just have those arms moving?
So there is the aspect that the turtle is kind of cute to animate. That wasn't really why we did it. It actually seemed like most successful games were just one really cute character, like Cut the Rope is just like that one character who has like big eyes and like the kid loves, and you don't really have to have animations going on everywhere. So we weren't really worried about the character being animatable. We could like, whether we needed to figure out how to like basically just have the artist do whatever tool to animate whatever they wanted, and then we could figure out some way to convert that into either a series of images or whatever it took. So we weren't really worried about that. We ended up going with the turtle mainly just because, I don't know, we had a bunch of different ideas. I think at some point we were talking about having like polar bears floating on like melting ice caps in the Arctic, but it seemed like it would be kind of like dark and depressing maybe, I don't know. At some point we're like, oh, we need a kitten on a raft, and that way it's clear that it's 100% helpless. I think the biggest problem actually with picking the turtle is because a turtle looks like it can swim, people get the impression that they should be able to steer the turtle independent of the water. And the entire mechanic of the game is you manipulate the water to make everything move. So our avatar actually misleads people a little bit. And even though we have like a story that explains why it is, like I guess so Luna, the reason it's named Luna is because like the turtle, our main avatar, I guess I can, let's look way back. So our main avatar has like this moon on her back, it's Luna. And I guess the background story is basically, we wanted to kind of like take all these elements that were kind of common in games and like maybe make them more incorporated. I think we were maybe inspired by things like Braid and Spider, where they had a background story, but they didn't like shove it in your face. It was just kind of like you got hints of it over time and you could take it or leave it. So anyway, our background story was, this is basically the moon. It was up in the sky with the stars, and Gearhead, our bad guy, basically took all the stars out of the sky and started turning them into mines and stuff like that. This is a plot to take over the world, and the moon was all left lonely in the sky. I had to dive back into the water and basically go rescue all the stars. So you're doing the thing like Mario Brothers where you get stars, but you're literally getting the stars to put them back up in the sky. Basically, because your avatar is a turtle, but you're actually the power of the moon, that's why you affect the tide instead of like swimming like just a normal ho-hum turtle. But so that was like the theory and the story and everything. I don't know how much that all came through. Probably not great. But yeah, there's our avatar with the turtle. So basically, we did it mainly because the story, but we also liked the tropical theme. We thought it was like bright. We were originally thinking we'd try to release like a little after Christmas, and people would be sick of all the like Santa games and like the reindeer and the snow. So we thought people would like to see something tropical. And I guess we did release after Christmas. It turns out the turtle actually happened to be nice. That's probably part of the reason we got featured in China, is I guess they really like turtles. So that was cool. But yeah, but it may have caused us some problems. I think like the cute kitten on the raft that was completely helpless, and it was clear that you had to like steer it to safety, would have probably like communicated better that it wasn't like really steering the ship. But it was convenient that it was easy to animate though. So, anything else before I move on to game design? We're doing on time.
Real quickly, you had mentioned earlier on that you went online and found an artist. I went on your site and saw that you got somebody like from DeviantArt, I think is their site. How did you go about finding somebody?
Yeah, so DeviantArt's actually his handle. We found it on Odesk. And I talked to that a little bit. That was actually one of the most awesome things. Although in our lessons learned, we'd actually rather just have a full-time artist. Although I'd still see doing that. So the Odesk was one site. I can't remember the name of the other site, but it's great. They have all these artists. They have their portfolios up. You basically contact them, you present them with like essentially your kind of proposal. They have an established rate. The company takes a very small percentage, like maybe, I don't know, I think we did it like 3.5%, like something pretty small, so the artist actually gets it. They have all these tools, so when the artist is working, it takes like random snapshots of their screen, so you can see that they're actually working and recording their time properly. They have all these tools so you can do reviews and stuff like that. All of the tax implications, so we had an artist from Australia, the company basically did all the taxes and everything like that for us. So all we really had to do is basically tell Odesk that we were willing to pay this much per hour, and they would essentially facilitate everything else. So that was actually an amazing experience. It's really easy to basically find art talent. And we were both creative directors and like kind of made scratch art. So we'd essentially create the original assets and make texture atlases, and we just kind of send them things and basically tell them just draw over things that keep roughly the same proportions and do that. And then we do any post-processing. If we need to do animation, we take his drawing, break it up into pieces and fill in the missing pieces. Like if you want to animate the flipper, there'd be gaps, so we have to fill it in and attach it to skeletons and stuff. But yeah, it worked really well. I think the reason we probably like an artist though is what we found out is we had the original thing, we're happy with everything, and then when we decided to make it freemium, it changed some things, and we also had some assets that we need to change based on like level redesign, and he was no longer available. So basically we had to actually finish up the art ourselves, which I think it's been like, I don't know, 10 hours making like one level gate. It's really bad. Using like GIMP and like a trackpad. It's horrible. Yeah, I remember one time at JPS I'd done a bunch of stuff for like particle systems, and I tried to show it worked by making a torch, and it just looked like a turd with blue arrows coming out of it. It was like when I knew I should never really do final art for a game. I think I saw a hand over there. Did I not? Nope. All right. Cool. So as far as design, we wanted like fluids to absolutely be at the core. It wasn't just a background. It's not like it's like a moving treadmill that you have to run across. We wanted you to manipulate the fluid and affect every nuance of it. The water had to be just right. This was really hard. If you make the water like too slow with like molasses and it doesn't even feel like water, and it just creates these weird sludgy currents that feel like strange. But at the same time, if you make it like actually like water, then the problem is you don't really have any control. Like if you ever put something in a bathtub and try just like splashing it to make it move really well, it doesn't really do anything close to what you want. So we had to basically tune forever until we found just the right balance between like feeling like water but not actually being so much like water that it was impossible. There are a bunch of other things, like because of the way the tech works, it's like this array of grids and it iterates through it, and generally speaking it creates this bias where the water kind of wants to move one way. So we had to like balance that by making it so when you touch the screen and do all the forces, we'd have to balance it. So like we were actually like multiplying by different amounts whether you're moving right or left, so it would feel like it was like symmetric and all that kind of stuff took forever to get right.
So you talked about, just mentioned how tweaking the water, making it feel just right. Did just right change throughout the development process? You mentioned that it might have taken like 4 years, right? So it might feel good in year 2, and then coming back to it, you start to realize maybe it is moving too slow or too fast.
Yeah, it took a pretty long time to get so we had just right, but amazingly enough, once we got there, it felt like it was pretty stable. I barely touched the fluid sim at all in the last like 2 years of the project. It kind of held up, which was awesome. Part of the reason might have been like fear of touching it, because the math is like, you need like a few PhDs to really understand it. I just took the original algorithm and like kind of translated it, and then after I optimized everything, I no longer even represented what was in the original white papers. So it meant like, you just like touch one thing and all of a sudden you get like knotted numbers everywhere and your screen just goes black and you can't even tell why, because it's all in like assembly, so it's like impossible to debug.
So I'd like to hear more about how that relates to every iteration of the game you're making. Every time you kind of build and suddenly you realize that the fluids are just off. How much retyping you had to do in between each test phase?
Yeah, so yeah, as far as the game design, generally speaking, but once we spent a long time just kind of independently, I would make test levels and have all this stuff because like the fluid sim is accurate enough. It's called like a non-compressible fluid sim. So if you look at Where's My Water or games that are actually 2D but try to look 3D, most of them use this fluid simulation technique that's actually basically just, they have large meshes that are basically interconnected springs, and then they just add like blobby water particles to it to make it look wet. And it's weird because water doesn't actually compress at all, but in those situations it's nice because what happens is when they drop the water, it actually, the springs compress, but it creates the illusion that it's actually flattening out in the third dimension and then it's pillowing back up. So really that's actually a big inaccuracy that happens to look perfect. But if you're actually looking from the top and trying to do real fluid sim, you don't really want that compressibility at all. So I would set up all these like test things where I create these long tunnels and make sure that if you moved your finger here, it would make things get sucked into the tunnel and move the whole way because the fluid sim was like correctly like affected by all the solids and all that kind of stuff. And that if you'd like create like little whirlpools, it would actually continue feedback and it wouldn't like settle too fast and just dissipate right away. But at the same time, it wouldn't like start like spiraling up to infinity. So I took all those test levels and basically got everything totally stable, at which point then it was like mainly working on visuals so that the behaviors that we got feeling right would work, and then trying to do things like make it so when we wanted the levels to be larger or we wanted like side-scrolling levels or wanted to like put currents or whirlpools into the screen, so it's like you could manipulate the water, but there are other forces also manipulating the water. So generally, most of those cases, it was really trying to basically add new mechanisms to the fluid sim without breaking what we'd established as the status quo. And then kind of independent of that, like there was a lot of level design going on. We're actually creating levels. And sometimes, generally speaking, if the sim changed in such a way that it broke a level and we didn't think the sim was fundamentally wrong, we would just fix the level because it was way cheaper to rewrite a level than to like reverse engineer like what I had done to the sim. If that makes sense. But generally speaking, it was pretty stable. It was almost like one of those things where since it was so foundational, once we got something we liked, we just kind of said, we'll leave this alone. We reskinned the rendering a couple times, but as far as what actually affects the way it works, yeah, it was kind of like a little bit of a third rail because it was scary to touch. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, we didn't really tweak it to make it thicker or thinner. It was like, once we had it feeling right, we just kind of got to the point where we were really used to it. So we just know how to space things out and position things. There's some certain shapes that work really well. Certain shapes are problematic. If you make too many really small land masses, if the solids get to the point where they're about the size of the cells in the grid, then it gets a little strange because you feel like you have these little boxes instead of like curving shores, and that makes artifacts more likely to show up in the simulation. So, but I think in a sense that was a strength, is what we were doing is instead of writing an engine and then just handing it over, and then the designers saying, well, I'm going to design and file bugs if there's something wrong with the engine and like they're working against each other, is we kind of like let the tech both like inspire design, but also we wouldn't like we wouldn't make the design work against the tech. We'd be willing to like accommodate it and try to basically make it shine without try to basically hide its weaknesses instead of like highlighting them. I don't know. Maybe I'm not sure if I answered your question. Also, like once again, we're working on the side, so we don't really have like iterations or test phases or anything like that. So,
well, your answer was over here, and then nerves kind of, you got it way earlier. You're good.
Okay, cool. Awesome. All right. Yeah. So we wanted our game to be super discoverable. We wanted people to like learn as they played the game. We didn't really want any text, partly because we didn't want to have to localize. We also wanted the story to be a backdrop. This is like a case where like we kind of did like Zelda-esque inspired, like where there were secret levels where you'd be playing, but there was like a patch where you could like go under the trees and pop out in the secret level and find extra power-ups. This was maybe a little misguided one, is once we found out we had to go freemium, we had to localize anyway, because you're not allowed to not have descriptions of everything you sell. In addition to that, freemium is interesting because if someone buys the game, they have like this inherent interest in like getting their money's worth. So once you buy the game, they're going to actually play the game until they're like, okay, it's no longer worth it. I guess that's a sunk cost. But when it's free, people will take the game and literally look at it for 10 seconds and then just walk away from it and say, I'm going to go try the next thing if it doesn't catch their interest. And that makes it so you can make a game that's discoverable and rich, but you definitely can't start out slow. Like a lot of our tests were kind of assuming people were like maybe already a little emotionally invested in the game. And in the freemium market, we found like we would lose 60%. So after we released, we found out 60% of the people like basically never made it past level 2, which is like really bad because we're like, whoa, nothing happened in the first 2 levels. It was basically like an empty world. It's like, figure out how to move your turtle. And then they would stop playing. And we hadn't even introduced really anything interesting. So yeah, that was kind of the case where switching to freemium kind of really hurt us because, well, we got a lot more people to see the game, but the latch rate was really low. So we tried to like build a world that had a lot of depth. We wanted to like fully explore all the water mechanics, see like, so we have like multiple themed worlds, and the second world is where we introduce currents and whirlpools and stuff like that. And the third world, we actually added an ice mechanic, which is one of the cases where I had to go back in and touch up the fluid sim a lot. So the ice mechanic is you can tap the screen and use an ice touch to basically freeze a portion of the water temporarily, and it like dynamically affects the solids in the fluid sim, so like it'll affect the way the water moves in addition to freezing enemies in place. And then designing a bunch of levels around that. We wanted it to be really replayable, so we wanted the levels to be hard enough that people would kind of keep on coming back to them, so they might get through the first time to come back to increase their score. We wanted this to be like really expressive, so like players would essentially, basically some players might have a playstyle where they swipe violently and then just see what the aftermath is, while other players might like be really control freaks and just do little tiny currents and touch it continuously. It supports multi-touch, you can touch it up to like 5 points, so although 5 points is tough because you might accidentally collapse the app because they added that gesture at some point after we started working. But so you can actually like steer multiple things in the environment all at the same time. So basically there was a lot of room for players to develop style. We wanted like mastery over time. So it's like, as you get better at the game, essentially your touch of nuance and ability to predict the currents and stuff will be better, but at the same time you'll always be kind of surprised. And that was also something where I think it might have been lost on the freemium market because do a whiteboard. So if I wanted to draw a graph of like where it was pulling at the time, so if this axis right here is time, and this axis is like from like 0 to 50, where this is basically tech that we made just for like anything not level specific, and this is like all the levels in the game. We had 50 of them. Basically, our time was basically something like this, as far as how much time we invested in the game. The graph of players playing the game was basically like this. So we actually spent 4 years getting out of the game and probably spent maybe at least 50% of the time working on something that like a vanishingly small percentage of players who actually played the game ever got to see, which is a really bad use of our resources. And so part of that was just maybe the case of like, I don't know, we're really maybe being too idealistic. We're thinking of our audience as people who played like old Nintendo games like Zelda and stuff like that, as opposed to people who basically played Candy Crush. So let's see. We used a lot of tropes in our game from the playtest game we did. We found a lot of people, we tried to, because we wanted to discover, we wouldn't just say, hey, it's a fluid sim, touch the screen and move your finger and the water moves and that's how you move everything. We wanted to see if they could kind of discover it. And it was kind of mind-bending because most people are just used to like steering their avatar and not having to control everything around them. So because of that, we didn't want people to have to learn something crazy, because we actually did want to make money, so we wanted a game that would have mass market appeal. So we didn't really want to be the case where we're like a game where like indie developers would totally love us, but everyone else would say, I don't get it. So instead, maybe, I don't know if we actually achieved it, but we tried to make a game that hopefully like people who like independent games could respect for being different from its mechanic perspective and its game design perspective, but wouldn't care about it necessarily being skinned to the hilt to be different. And also we didn't have an artist, so we couldn't really do something truly integrated from an art perspective. But because it was like kind of everything's all about movement and you're moving the water and dodging things and manipulating the environment, it was kind of like platform style, so we decided to go ahead and theme the game using like tropes from like other good video games like Mario Brothers and stuff. So you get the stars, you collect coins, you avoid mines, you use keys to open gates. And part of the reason is we wanted people to immediately know what they should do. So the challenge was in figuring out how to do it and how the game worked, and not just basically looking at the blank screen and not even understanding like what the goal was. So we're trying to give someone like a framework where they could focus on where we were innovating and not just be like lost in the details. Although we definitely, I think we've had a couple of people over at Indie Games who didn't like the fact that it wasn't like super unique, like Limbo or something like that. But, on the art side, I talked about this a little earlier about us creating the concept art. Here's a bunch of pictures of like prototypes of what our avatar might look like that we like iterated on with the artist at Odesk. So kind of already talked all about that slide. Our audio is actually pretty awesome. It was, how are we doing on time? Decent. So our audio was pretty cool. I lucked out with a friend who was a percussionist and a professional musician, and I asked him for advice on like if he knew anyone that could compose the track, and it turned out, unbeknownst to me, that not only is he a composer, but he's also a classic game collector, and he's really like obsessed with like 8-bit Nintendo and old Sega and stuff like that. So he actually gave us this totally like awesome retro soundtrack that has like steel pan samples and stuff like that. So it was not only really fitting into the island theme, but it like kind of like played in with our whole like theme where we're like a throwback to the classic games. So that was really cool. On the other side, we did something that was kind of disappointing in a way, is we decided instead of like paying them an hourly wage, we cut them in for a percentage, but it was a fairly small percentage because we're like, well, we're spending like years on this and you're spending like days on this. But by doing that, it was kind of stunk that he was a friend, and then since we didn't make a fortune, he made pretty much a very small percentage of not a fortune. So, so that was kind of rough. We felt bad. So we ended up actually just giving him a bonus at the end because like we thought he did awesome work, but we didn't really make enough for his percentage of profits to be relevant. Awesome. Lessons learned. Is there any question about the design thing? This is, yeah. How much time is the good point to transition to wrapping up the thing? I don't think there'll be a long Q&A at the end, just because people are asking questions.
Easily go on another 10-15 minutes.
Awesome. So this is like the lessons learned part. This is probably the meat of the stuff that we figured out from actually being featured and like the mistakes we made and all this stuff. And some of the questions that I deferred earlier be here. So from the press, one thing we found out is we were like, well, we're going to take like a few years to make this thing. We don't want it to leak out and then some game studio to like copy our idea, and then just because they have like 20 developers that are working full time, beat us to the punch. That was kind of asinine for us to think that would happen, because when it turned out, we saved everything up to the end and we're like, okay, let's make our press announcements and send them out and go ahead and tell people like they can't disclose it before this date because we want to like have this big reveal. It turned out it was like really actually hard to get attention because places like Touch Arcade, there's like hundreds of apps that come out every week, and they basically have a really high bar where they want to like review games. So if they haven't heard wind of it in advance, they're really not going to care that much because they're going to be looking at the games that they've heard rumors about for a long time. So basically, other than when we got released, getting essentially our description posted on their website, we didn't get any write-up from like Touch Arcade or anything like that. It turns out most of the press sites out there are kind of shady. We sent it to them and they were like, well, if you pay us $300, we'll write an article about your game. So pretty much it's just press for sale. We didn't actually spend any money on that because we just thought that was kind of lame. And also we just didn't really want to sink a bunch of money up front when it wasn't really clear that anyone who would actually play a kind of mainstream game aimed at like youths would actually like read Touch Arcade or anything like that. But that was kind of rough, where essentially we had thought we might get like focusing on the innovation and that we were like super touch and like it was something like fluid based gameplay, which is really hard to do, but no one really paid attention to it. So I would say, as far as press goes, don't try to keep it under wraps. If you're working on something, get as much attention as early as you can because it takes a while to get that ball rolling.
Did you see what the paid for press would have gotten you? Or like, were you like, is it going to be a positive review, $3? Or did you go that route?
I think a lot of the time, even places that were just like, if you want us to take your press release and put a link to it on our site, it's like $100. And the thing is a lot of places, and the reason they can make money off of it is because if you Google your game and it shows up at the top and you're not already famous, it's generally based on how many references there are to your game. So essentially, if you spend thousands of dollars, you can basically get a bunch of places to post links to your press release, not so people can read them, but so Google can say, oh, a bunch of people linked to this page and have it show up. The most mainstream ones, I think, because I think the best, like Monument Valley got a bunch of write-ups that were like really heartfelt, and I think they created buzz early and got people really interested in it, and people wrote genuine reviews. And like Touch Arcade, you submit to them and they're like, by the way, don't contact us, we won't contact you, we may look at this, but they don't want people to essentially influence their process. So the respectable ones, basically it's really hard to last minute get something in because there's so many things out there, and since they don't want to be influenced, you need to call your attention somehow. Another thing that was interesting is So if you don't get mentioned explicitly, I would recommend not starting your game with something at the end of the alphabet, because if you do end up on like the Touch Arcade list of everything that came out this week, it's alphabetical, and that wouldn't be so bad except for the fact that everyone includes a movie in their thing, and it takes a while to load. So actually, to even get to where we were on the page, you actually had to wait like a minute for Touch Arcade to load so you could see our write-up. While if like we had just started with the letter A from in the top. Like, I don't know if you noticed that puzzle game where it was like AA, FF, and all that stuff. AA made like 10 times more revenue than like FF and GG. And I think it's just because it was the front end.
So if you were doing it over today, what would you have done differently?
Definitely would have done the press earlier. The testing strategy.
How would you have done the testing?
Well, the press basically, and I get into this in testing, is I would have actually used I would have done much more testing, and then, well, here, I'll just go to it real quick. So analytics, basically, we instrumented our code with Flurry. That was amazing. We basically recorded every possible event about what people purchased, what people played. We found out all this information. It was awesome. The thing that stunk is we found out all this information after we released, and that was when we got featured. We had 250,000 users, and we were getting dumped with information and trying to get an update out to respond to it in that week window where we had everybody's eyes on it, and that was really hard. So I'll come back to that slide. So from a testing perspective, you should know your target audience and actually test against them. We basically got friends from the game industry to test it, so we essentially had a bunch of hardcore gamers testing it. So we made our game way too difficult. We basically, everyone who played the game was like, oh, this seems pretty cool, it's just way too boring, it's too easy. And then it's like, we'd show them like level 30, and they'd be like, yeah, this is more like it. So we kind of like ramped it up, and by the time we had played the game so long, like, I can play through the entire game without dying once. So it was like, yeah, it doesn't seem too hard. But it turned out, I think, so on level 2 is the first level where you can die, and you basically have to swim headfirst into a spike. And like 60% of people never made it past there. Not because they got bored, because they lost all their lives there and then didn't feel like waiting for the timeout period to lapse or like purchase another life because they weren't invested in the game yet. So it turned out our game really attracted social gamers, and almost all the playtest was against like hardcore gamers. So that was really bad. So figure out who's going to actually play your game, test against them. We didn't do that, that stunk. We should have tested a lot more. We basically did like play sessions where we'd have someone sign an NDA. That was part of the thing. Forget NDAs. Like, we're worried about people like leaking our game. We should have been begging people like after they played our game, like, lie about it. So definitely try to get press right at the beginning. I wouldn't worry about NDAs at all. I mean, I guess you could NDA it if you're hoping that people think it's secretive, so they're more likely to blab about it. I don't know. But test all hardware. That was another one of our big things. Is we didn't really want to. There's no thing where like we didn't want to invest in buying like full price Apple everything. So like on the 6 Plus, I bought one, tested it a little bit, and returned it, but that wasn't really thorough enough. And because of that, it turned out this was an unfortunate thing. Is the 6 Plus, I didn't even realize the 6 Plus has 2 modes. There's the zoom mode, and then there's the non-zoom mode. Well, when you're zoomed in on the 6 Plus, even if you play a game, it affects the resolution when you're in the game. I thought that was just zooming the icons. So apparently, like, it confused our, like, if you used Unity, it wouldn't have been a problem because they would have handled it for you. But like, it confused our logic that it detected the device, and it decided, oh, that's not as high as the 6 Plus, so it must be a 5S. And it used the wrong bitmap, and like, it just like hosed everybody. But we couldn't even figure out why, because all our reviews were in Chinese, but we had some like percentage of 6 Plus users who was like, this game doesn't work at all, it's total crap. It's like, what's happening? And we had to basically reverse engineer it when we finally, someone posted like a screenshot, and we're like, what's that? And basically like manipulate the code until we could figure out what it was. So that was kind of crazy. So test all hardware, and basically the main reason I'd say this is solicit testers, use TestFlight. We use TestFlight to test a little bit, but we should have just gotten like on Reddit or something like that. We should have gotten thousands of people playing our game. Basically no NDAs, just play our game, use whatever devices, put it on Reddit, just talk about what your game's like. Let the people who would naturally be attracted to it in the store get attracted on there. Get the beta testers, engage them, get their feedback, and have those people basically not only give you all the test of hardware and stuff like that, but they're also your publicity, because if they give you feedback and then you address their feedback, they'll be happy about it and they're more likely to talk about it. And that way it's like, it might be that Touch Arcade is like, hey, I know someone who's like testing the game and they told me about this, so I wanted to check it out. And that's way better than just like sending a press release to someone. So I think this is the biggest thing we did wrong, because the last thing you want to do is actually get lucky enough to get featured and then essentially find out after that that you did something wrong. Because we were able to like in like 3 days, like do the turnaround that like once we reverse engineered that problem and like did some level tweaks, and we made it so like you had to get like at least 10 levels into the game before you ever got asked to pay for another life. And all that kind of stuff. But it's like, by the time it actually made it through the entire like submission process, and we did do an expedited request, and that was interesting because Apple just out of hand denied it, but then I guess China contacted them, was like, no, let them get their app in, which was cool. That felt like we were badass for a second, because it was an emotional roller coaster, because we're like, oh God, they rejected us, we failed. And then we heard that we got accepted, and it was really exciting. But at the end, it didn't actually make that much of a difference. Like, more people did see it, but we only got the last 2 days of our 7-day window where people actually saw the version where there wasn't like the death wall. So it was kind of rough. So yeah, basically, I'd say our biggest lesson learned was we should have basically combined testing with press and just try to get as many people, like essentially beta users, playing the game as possible. And it's just, we were just under the impression that it was like, if you're someplace like Valve or something like that, you can do that because no one's going to have like the chutzpah to copy you, and they wouldn't be able to anyway. That we're like, well, we don't want people to see our game and think it's a good idea and then just decide they're going to copy it, and we won't be able to do anything about it. Because I don't know, it seems like copying is really rampant in iOS. Like, it was kind of crazy. If you looked at the other games made by the studio that made, what was that one where it was like Staying Together or something, where it was like the couple moving around? That seemed pretty innovative. But if you look at there, it's like they have like 4 versions of like Minecraft, and then like 3 versions of like remakes of Flappy Bird. So it's like all the releases up to that point were just like copies of like other games, which is funny. So we were trying to like avoid that kind of stuff, and I don't think we should have. That was the biggest thing. What's up?
Yeah, question on like which like subreddits or other communities or forums or whatever like we found would be the most I don't know, like engaged in like testing and stuff?
Well, that's a good question. I think Reddit maybe, but we only did one release and we flopped it. So, so next time we'd approach this differently. But yeah, we haven't done a follow-up. So, and it's kind of late now to get beta testers since we've already released and had our chance in the spotlight. So I don't think Apple would probably feature us retroactively unless we did a major overhaul. So if we did something new, we'd probably release it as a separate game, because I don't think we're quite successful enough to warrant necessarily doing Tourtellotte 2.
So you never did any paid advertising or anything to drive more people in?
So that's interesting too, is freemium games make very little per user. You can expect to make $1 off 200 users. It costs more than that to acquire a user.
Just what paid games are the same way, but keep going.
Yeah, so if your Game of War, it's weird. Like, yeah, if your Game of War or like something like that, you can spend, I guess, hundreds of millions of dollars on advertising and then somehow like break even, but you have like that venture cap thing to give you that huge ground surge. But from a small level, we were going to like do some little experiments where we basically just tried to like turn the faucet on a little bit, like, okay, let's throw a few more $1,000s into it and see what happens. But I think you have to create enough groundswell that basically then you get like secondary effects, which is problematic. We have some other issues, which is one of the avenues for secondary effects is things like Facebook integration and stuff like that. And that was really problematic because we were successful in China, which Facebook's illegal, yeah. So that was rough too, because we were kind of counting on social media to help us out, and that didn't really work out too well. But yeah, the other thing, by the way, is we talked to users directly when we were testing and face-to-face stuff. The analytics were much more telling. We should have just trusted the statistics and done larger sample sets. Yeah, so social media, we did Facebook integration. That's really rough because Facebook really tries to live up to their motto of moving fast and breaking things, which is right before release, they broke all their Facebook integration that made it so you could like request a friend to give you an extra life. So part of the way the game was tuned was assuming that essentially, oh, well, it's totally okay that after you die 3 times, you have to either wait 30 minutes or pay 99 cents for 3 more lives, because you'll just say, hey, I'll just tell my friend on Facebook to give me another life, and then they'll give me another life, and I'll keep playing, and that'll like kind of spread the word. Except for the fact that, one, that feature totally broke a couple weeks before we released. Not only did it break, but the Facebook pipeline for notifying users of when the bug got fixed also broke. So we submitted help requests to them and they never heard about it. And then like after we had already released, we bugged them again and they were like, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, that broke. We didn't even know you were asking us questions. So that was really rough. We were featured in China, like I said, so there is no Facebook. It's like totally disabled. There's an equivalent of Facebook there, and it's all in Chinese, so you would need to speak Chinese to understand the APIs. So that's pretty rough. And yeah, and I would say you should also probably have someone who's good at social media. So that was the other issue, is like Matt and I, we don't tweet. We don't really use Facebook too much. our wives use Facebook, but they're not exactly gamers, so I don't think like their style of like posting to social media would actually like be good for a game. It might be good to, if you can't like manage to create a groundswell through integration, it might be good if someone in your company isn't already like a big social media person to actually have someone dedicated to it, because I don't know, it was kind of rough trying to get that started. It felt artificial for having someone who never tweets to like start randomly tweeting about their game the day it comes out. So that was kind of rough. Monetization, yeah, so we put ads in the game. That was in some ways, it was kind of rough. Most of our negative reviews were basically people who despised the fact there were ads there. It's kind of rough reading reviews in the stores because people can be pretty brutal about it. And we never really understood the ads thing, because pretty much everyone who complained vehemently about the number of ads is someone who we wouldn't pay for it, because you could disable the ads by buying it. So there's someone who wouldn't have bought it in the first place anyway, so they wouldn't have played the game. And if we turned off the ads, obviously we wouldn't have made any money off of them. So I guess it's not that big of a deal. But there are some annoying things about ads, like iAd seems like a good way to do. iAd doesn't even work in China, which is interesting. So a week before we released, we decided to add ad colony support in AdMob, which is Google's ad platform. It's good if we did, because we pretty much made most of our money off of ads, and we would have made, I think we made a total of like $10 off of iAd or something like that. It's crazy, because they don't work. So in China, so definitely don't rely on iAd if you're going to go international. In-app purchases are interesting. We actually had pretty good success with that. This was part of a roller coaster experience, because we released and we thought we didn't get featured in the US, so we're like really depressed, because we're like, well, we didn't hear back about any press releases, we didn't get featured, basically it's over, we're doomed. That was kind of depressing. And then all of a sudden, 24 hours later, we're like, whoa, we've had 20,000 downloads. And then like a little bit later, we're like, whoa, we have 50,000 downloads. And then we're like going crazy, because we're like, oh my God, it's going viral. But then it turned out we just got featured in China, which is crazy because Apple doesn't even tell you when you get featured. We found out because after 3 days of trying to figure out what was going on, someone looked at App Annie and was like, hey, do you guys know you got featured in China? Which is really strange so Apple, not only can you not communicate to them at all about the process of getting featured, they don't even tell you if you do get featured. But so this is crazy. So we instrumented all our stuff in Flurry, and part of the roller coaster thing is, so the number of downloads we got that Apple told us about exactly matched the number of downloads according to our in-game metrics. But according to our in-game metrics, our in-app purchases were like orders of magnitude higher than what Apple told us we bought. But then what's crazy is the percentage of each thing that was purchased matched exactly the percentages relative to each other that Apple told us. So it turns out getting featured in China is also problematic, because they have a lot of piracy. I think they actually have pirate app stores, or something like that. Because essentially, the number of people who bought legitimate copies of our game, and then according to our metrics, purchase buttons that never got reported through the App Store was like huge. So at some point we're like, millionaires. And then it was like, nope. I was really hoping it was like when you rented a movie and like 4 days later they send you a receipt. So like for a week I was just holding my breath. I'm like, it's coming. They're gonna tell me in a week. But it didn't. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know. So freemium is rough. On the other hand, if we'd done premium, we did get 250,000 users in that first week. That was a whole bunch of eyes on the game. It was really satisfying. If we went premium, I'm not sure. It's not like we would have gotten 250,000 times 99 cents. We probably would have had like a few thousand people pay for it. I'm not really sure. So it's hard to say. Like, definitely you get a lot of people who are willing to look at the game because there's no initial investment. I think the biggest problem about it is you have to catch them right away, because they'll look at it, so you get their eye on it, but you really only have their attention for like a fraction of a second. And if you don't hook them right away, they'll just move on, because they'll just go download every free game that got featured and like look at each one really quick and maybe like latch onto one of them. So you definitely might want to wow them right away and then like ramp up, but not try to dipping their toes in the water slowly. Yeah, I guess I already talked a lot about this. Getting featured is a short window. It's also super hard to predict. I don't know, looking at the games in the App Store, it's like I still swear like 90% of the games in the App Store, and I have no idea how they got featured. I don't know, it's really strange. So I have all kinds of weird conspiracy theories about how they pick what gets featured in the App Store. Like I was like, I bet they actually intentionally pick some percentage of bad games just to keep hope alive that any game can succeed. I don't know, it's strange theories. But I mean, on the other hand, our game definitely did have problems, and we actually did get featured. So that was cool. It is interesting, going back to the ad thing, is we got featured in Thailand as well. And apparently a user in Thailand is worth about like 0.5% as much as a user in the US. Because like 2 users in the US would like generate the same ad revenue as like thousands of users in Thailand. So that's the other thing, is getting featured in the US market might be much more lucrative. And that's probably the equation we really need to explore as far as advertising, is it might be that our math that says we'd lose money if we paid for advertising. If we paid for advertising in the US market, it might not be that way. It could be that since our in-app purchases would be legitimate, that might be relevant. Of course, I think those pirated app stores, part of the reason people use them is because the curves are the same. I think they must charge real money for them, but I think they probably charge a lot less money, which is why more people purchase. So I'm not sure what the math would work out. Yeah, so that's a good question. Is like US users might be worth a lot more than Chinese users. I already talked about short attention span. You don't really see what's going on. And also, basically, if you don't have everything firing on full cylinders when you're released, it's really hard to react in time, because 5 days will pass and your window's up and you didn't have a chance to respond to feedback. Yeah, so the last slide, I guess, is what you're talking about. The main things we do differently, we add a partner on the art side. We kind of got burnt by like having to wait for when his contract ran out, like getting more art or having to do art ourselves. I think we probably could have pushed the creative boundaries a little bit if we had someone who was focused purely on the art. Because at some point we just had to say, well, this is pretty good. Is it worth like hemorrhaging more money to see if we get something a little bit better from a guy who's like drawn some like pretty dorky looking turtles? On the other hand, yeah, he did some amazing things too, but there were like weird things where the turtle had a strange beak that like just looked strange. So it was, yeah, if he actually listens to this, he probably won't, but I feel bad for saying that. He did a good job. But yeah, so it'd be cool to have a partner on the art side who could really push the limits and make that innovative. From the marketing side, I don't know, I think we'd either want to take on a partner that actually focused on marketing. We really were worried about taking on someone that just did pure marketing, because I don't know, we always kind of felt like when we're in the game industry that it was like some guy who basically just talks and takes all the credit for everything, gets paid the big bucks, while the people like grinding their lives into dust like don't get paid anything. So we really didn't want to take on someone who wouldn't basically do anything other than basically take all the credit for everything we did and get like an equal share of the money without having to put much effort into it. But in retrospect, I would have rather someone do that and we actually make money. So, so the other option is getting a publisher. We didn't do that because we read a lot of horror stories about like publishers who just basically, they get a bunch of people to like sign on and give away 50% of the profit, but they don't actually do anything to help them. They just basically figure if they get hundreds of people to give them their game and one of those games is successful, they'll get 50% of the profit for no effort. So we were really worried about that. Also, by the time we decided that the environment had changed enough, we might need a publisher, because it was unlikely we could do another Tiny Wings type scenario. We were pretty much done, so it was like, I don't know how much help they'd give us. We would have rather like engage them earlier. But yeah, in retrospect, it'd be pretty tempting to get a publisher. Of course, we kind of burnt that bridge with Tourtellotte because they probably would want to release with it. I don't think we could retroactively get them to slap a like the Xenolab logo on it and get featured. So yeah, so those are the main things we do differently from the lessons learned. And that's it.
So I think it's interesting that you have a finished game. You don't have, so what did your numbers finally end up looking like for in-app purchases or selling for that?
Basically, we roughly broke even. It's actually kind of really frustrating because if you ignore the axes I put on this graph and you say, this is basically the like kind of exponential curve where like 99% of people are down here and like 1% of people like make millions of dollars. And there's this weird like strange elbow where you break even. So we actually managed to hit this thing. So we essentially, between in-app purchases and ads and everything, just in that first week where we're in the spotlight, we actually managed to essentially make our investment back, which is cool because it means we're so close to winning the lottery, but at the end, we didn't like break into this turf. I'm not sure it's still like that far off. Like one of the things is like I said, it's like we need something where basically people who would like the game and be really excited about it could like have a great experience, but people who were really inept because they were either like really young as opposed to like 20 years old, or because they were a complete social gamer and like weren't actually good at like dodging moving objects. That I don't know, we might like rebrand it as like an endless runner or something like that and be more procedurally generated. Because with procedural generation, basically all of our effort affects all the customers the whole time. So we're like leveraging it as opposed to spending all this time tweaking a level that like a handful of people in the world have ever gotten to. So you are in a pretty elite club, by the way, if you beat all 50 levels of our game. But yeah, so at the end, it was kind of brutal. It tapered off really quickly. It's like there's still, if you look at like the game center right now, we have on any given week there's like 1,000 people playing the game. At some point, we had like hundreds of thousands of people playing it, like 20,000 new users a day, kind of turning over. But the problem is it was a pretty heavy turnover. It would be like 20,000, 40,000, 60,000. And it's really also hard to tell at first until it panned out what the metrics were like. If people were looking at it and then leaving and then 20,000 new people were looking at it, or if it was the case where it was just like people would play the game and come back 3 days later, so we're kind of seeing a cyclical steady set of users. But yeah, it's definitely tapered off. At some point we were in the action game category. We were like the 10th most popular action game in China. We were right behind Clash of Clans, which was pretty awesome. And in the simulation game category, we were number 3 in China, so that was really cool. Now we're like down in the hundreds. It's like as soon as you're not featured and driving people that way, basically drop off. Because we don't have any like social media groundswell because we're in Asia. We're like Facebook is kind of off the charts. Even if we were good at social media, I don't think anyone there would be reading our blog or looking at our website.
So nobody from China approached you while that was going on?
What do you mean approached?
Approached you like a publisher approached you or anything like that?
Publishers want to get dibs before you get featured, not like after the fact, I don't think.
Yeah.
I could be wrong about that, but generally I think they'd like to basically get it up front and basically use their platform to like sell it and get a part of that initial windfall. Because if you also, I think interviews with like Monument Valley, for example, they were saying they made all their money kind of like at initial launches and stuff like that. Basically, it's like, that's part of the reason we went freemium is because freemium would typically have like more of a plateau in terms of income, while this curve also can be mapped to like the amount of profit made by like premium games where essentially they get featured, they make a lot of money, and it just kind of drops off to nothing because it's not a continuous investment. But part of that is getting a user base that continually purchases things. And that was the thing is we tuned our game too much for hardcore gamers. So basically people just, except for a small overlap of people who were really good at games and also like social gamers who were attracted to our games, most people I think just thought it was too hard and lost their lives too quickly.
So then based on that, for future projects, which you said you are going to eventually do something else.
Yeah.
Would you guys go for this kind of mass market appeal again and try to tune it better to be kind of easy or playable by this kind of group of social gamers out there, or would you kind of go more for like the kind of hardcore market, like the people who are into kind of artistic indie game / Steam type stuff that stuff that's going to be like a little bit harder, more challenging, more like edgy art, kind of more adult theme stuff.
I think I doubt like we'd go for that, although it does look pretty cool when you drop blood in the water. It looks good. But although we're messing with that more like oil slick for like squids or something like that, I think. But most likely we would probably go for either mass market kind of endless runner type thing where it's more procedural. So, because the nice thing about procedural is people keep playing the same thing over again and it ramps up pretty quickly. So, and since it's kind of ramping up exponentially and people are just trying to get a little bit further, it's like the difference between someone who's not very good at the game playing and someone who's really good at the game playing is basically they play for 45 seconds instead of 30 seconds, but they're going to play the same 30 seconds or 45 seconds over and over again, trying to just get a little bit better. So you can leverage the same content again. While for us, it was really like, play a level, then move on to the next level. And at some point it was just like, well, if you play 4 levels, even if you like them, if the next level is too hard, you kind of hit a wall. Other possibility was like just doing a lot more branching content so you could explore side paths. Or so it was like there were side paths that were really hard and it wasn't linear, where it was like maybe a easier path through the game with like exploration on the side. And then I think instead of the hardcore game, we'd be more likely to do something like Flower or something like that, where it's more like artistic and like people are like attracted to the game either because they appreciate it artistically or because it's easy, but not because it's like really crazy. Because I think I'm about to be a father. He's a father of two. One thing we really liked about Disney Epic Mickey was finally, working on a game that we could have our kids play. Sure. I have to say, explain one Deus Ex, you're like shooting children in the head, things like that.
Yes, I'm learning Unity with C#, but up until their presentations, and they also use their own stripped down code, not using Unity. You were saying the same thing, how you created your own code from scratch. What are the pros and cons to that? Would you suggest learning to do that? And what program did you use to do that? Did you use Xcode?
Yeah, so we used Xcode. I would not try to. So if you were someone who historically worked on game engines, and you're like, well, should I use someone else's game engine or should I roll my own? Then I would consider it. But learning everything you have to do to write a game engine from scratch, it's a lot of work even if you've already done it before because you're not on a large team. But I think the fun part of making a game is making the game, and you shouldn't do anything to distract it. We were someone who's like, we know how to write game engines, so if we write a game engine that no one else has and it enables us to do something amazing because we designed it for a specific game, that would give us a big advantage. But I would never write a game engine from scratch just so I could make a game that I could have made with another game engine. And even in retrospect, it's possible we might revisit this because we'd have to rewrite so much of our game engine now. That's the maintenance burden too. Now it's like we want pixel shaders, we probably want some 3D art assets. Doing all that would be heftier. When it came down to it, I wrote everything in assembly. On the 6S, I just turned all that off because all the assembly instructions changed for the 6S because it has different numbers of registers, so none of that even works. And it turns out the 6S is so darn fast that everything works just the old unoptimized way without it being too problematic. So as the platform improves, it's I don't know, for the next one, there's a chance we might we'll keep the fluids in, but try to push other stuff in. But on the other hand, we're dorky game engine guys, so we might be like, oh no, we want to learn Swift and also do something else. So it's hard to say. I don't think there's a strong reason to do it unless it just really suits talents you already have. Or if you're really interested in it, you're passionate and interested about learning that. Otherwise, it might just be frustrating. And generally speaking, even if I was in the game industry, working with a bunch of professional things, I would say unless there's a strong reason to not do it, everyone wants to write their own game engine and do it from scratch. And I think generally leveraging pre-existing technology is almost always a net win, unless you just have a great reason not to. But yeah, so yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. But as far as what we did, we just wrote it in Objective-C and Xcode.
Okay.
So
last question, I guess? Yeah.
What about some lessons learned around localization and dealing with vendors that translate? Do you have any nightmares?
No, localization was awesome. Do localization. The Apple framework for localization is pretty good. We actually, you can see our translation credits. Those are just all friends of ours that were like, hey, if we put your name in the credits, will you do translation basically for free? And they were like, sure. And I mean, we weren't we didn't have conversations or something, so we don't have pages. We were basically,
right.
And for all I know, the Chinese translation doesn't even make sense. Because I don't even know how to type it in to translate it back, and it's seems weird when it does translate back, but he swears it's about right. But yeah, it was. But no, it's it was really easy. Those are friends from college and uncles and drinking buddies that we just cajoled into basically translating. Because a lot of people are pretty excited to have their name in the credits of something. So that's not that bad. But once again, we had 2 pages of text to translate. It was a little rough when we had to do the quick update and we had to ask everyone to translate 4 more chunks of text really quickly. But yeah, but it was pretty much a breeze. On the other hand, if you're making a role-playing game or something where you have lots of descriptions or lots of interactive text or conversation, then you probably have to get a translation service, and I have no experience with that. But it seems like if you have to use one of them, you can expect to spend a few $1,000s. And at this point, we kind of wanted to finish the game and stop hemorrhaging money into it. Yeah. But yeah, translation wasn't too bad.
Well, great. Thanks so much. Let's thank Adam again. Yeah. feel free to hang out for a few more minutes, talk, have more drinks and stuff, and keep an eye out on the Meetup group for future events. Thanks again for coming.